Story 1. A few months ago, a new business investor joined the company as a manager. From the start, he has been incredibly strict, cracking down on anything he deems inefficient and showing no flexibility. After spending a week observing how we work, he and the other managers held a company-wide meeting to address what he called wrinkles in the workplace. This wasn't a discussion, though it was more of a 20-minute lecture about how things would be done his way or not at all. The most striking line from the meeting was, "If we want your input, we'll ask for it. Period." I quickly realized that this comment was aimed directly at me. The company has been dealing with a high employee turnover rate, and I'm in a unique position to know why since my role involves interacting with everyone. Many employees were leaving because the work wasn't what they had expected. A common complaint was, "If I'd known this was the job, I wouldn't have taken it." Most employees had signed on for roles involving customer service, answering emails, assisting with phone inquiries, and helping customers directly. Instead, they found themselves spending 90% of their time in a sweltering warehouse, packing online orders. I shared this feedback with management, thinking they might want to take it into account. However, while they thanked me at the time, the new manager took great offense. He decided to address my feedback in that meeting, framing it as unsolicited advice. After the meeting, the managers spoke to me privately. They referred back to the feedback I had provided about employees leaving and accused me of implying they were deceitful during the hiring process. I clarified that I wasn't making such an accusation, I was simply relaying what employees had said about their frustrations. They didn't seem to care. Instead, they doubled down, repeating, "If we want your input, we'll ask for it. Period." It was then I realized that directive was specifically for me. I asked for clarification on what they considered to be input, and the new manager responded bluntly, "Unless you're asking us a question directly related to your job, we don't want to hear from you. We don't want your opinion on how we run the business, your ideas for improvement, or gossip about what others are saying. Just focus on your tasks." Fair enough, I thought. If that's how they want it, I'll respect their decision. Before the new manager joined, my ideas and input were always appreciated. But since he had the support of the other managers, or at least their silence, I decided to comply with his request. The turnover problem, unsurprisingly, didn't improve. 2 more employees came and went, both citing the same issue. This isn't what I signed up for. About 5 weeks ago, we hired another new employee. Instead of quitting like the others, he became increasingly frustrated. I often overheard him venting to others about the monotonous work in the hot warehouse. Week by week, he seemed to grow angrier, until one day, he snapped. I was working at my desk upstairs when I heard loud crashing noises. Curious, I went down to the warehouse to see what was happening. There, I found the new employee furiously smashing customer packages. Other workers had gathered around, watching in stunned amusement. It was like something out of a comedy show. The new manager came down to investigate the commotion. Long story short, the employee was fired on the spot. Afterward, the manager asked me if I had any idea why the worker had lost his temper. I responded honestly, "I don't know the exact reason, but I do know he's been complaining for weeks about working in a hot warehouse and feeling misled about his role. Maybe he just reached his breaking point." The manager looked at me and said, "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" I replied, "Because the last time I brought up similar concerns, you accused me of implying deceit in the hiring process and told me to stop gossiping." His face turned red as he realized the irony. While he had to grudgingly admit that he was wrong, I was still reprimanded for taking the directive too literally and accused of being petty. But honestly, I didn't care. During the rampage, the employee destroyed goods worth around $10,000. Some items were valued at $2,000 each. Adjusting the stock levels and calculating the losses made the entire ordeal oddly satisfying. Maybe finding enjoyment in that does make me a bit petty, but after everything, it felt like poetic justice. Story 2. In my culture, the average height is around 5'5". but I stand a full foot taller at 6'5". Because of my height, I'm often asked to help people reach items on high shelves at grocery stores. I don't mind lending a hand as long as the item is light. 2 to 3 kilograms is fine. However, heavier items tend to create a mini avalanche of dust, which no one wants to deal with. This particular story took place in 2022, shortly after my family moved into a new apartment near a massive wholesale store called Metro Cash and Carry. It's similar to Walmart, originally owned by a German company, but later acquired by Reliance. The store mainly caters to business owners, and many smaller shops in the area get their stock from there. It's a convenient place for us to buy in bulk. On this day, my wife and I decided to split up to shop more efficiently. She went to pick up oils while I gathered grains. While browsing, I noticed a great deal on 1 kilogram packs of wheat, which were cheaper per kilo than the 5 kilogram packs. However, the 1 kilogram packs were almost out on the main shelf, so I reached up to the top shelf to grab some. As I did, an elderly woman behind me politely asked if I could hand her 5 packs as well. I happily helped her, passing them down before she thanked me and moved on. I began pushing my cart toward the legume section when I heard a loud, "Excuse me." I thought someone was calling for an employee, so I kept going. But then, an even louder "Excuse me" stopped me in my tracks. I turned around and saw her, a Karen, waving me down like she was hailing a cab. Confused, I pointed to myself and asked, "Are you talking to me?" She snapped, "Yes, can you please help me?" Without moving, I responded, "With what?" Karen pointed at a 5 kilogram pack of rice on the top shelf and asked if I could bring it down for her. I glanced at the hefty pack and, as politely as possible, explained that it was too heavy for me to grab safely. I suggested she ask one of the employees nearby for help and turned back to continue my shopping. But not 5 seconds later, I felt a tug on my arm. Karen was now physically pulling me back toward the rice shelf. She kept yanking my arm, insisting, "It's not that heavy. I'm in a hurry. Just get it for me." For a moment, I stood there, completely stunned and flustered. While I may be tall, I'm also non-confrontational and prefer to avoid creating scenes. Unsure of how to handle the situation, I did the only thing that came to mind. I pulled out my phone and called my wife. My wife and I balance each other out perfectly. She's petite, much shorter than the average height, and has a personality louder than a jet engine if I had to compare. The moment I said, "Hey, hon, could you come over here? A lady's giving me trouble," she was on her way. Within moments, she appeared, storming over with the intensity of a one-woman army. She locked eyes with Karen, who still had a grip on my arm, and said loud enough for half the store to hear, "Why are you touching my husband? He doesn't work here, and he's definitely not your personal assistant." Karen, caught off guard, stammered a few words, quickly dropping my arm and taking a step back. My wife, clearly unimpressed, asked, "So what exactly do you want from my husband?" Karen, now flustered, mumbled something about just needing help to get the rice down. Raising an eyebrow, my wife looked around and spotted one of the employees nearby. "If you need help with rice, that's what the staff is here for. My husband doesn't work here." She then turned to the employee and said, "Excuse me, could you assist this lady with the rice up there?" The employee walked over without hesitation, and Karen, muttering under her breath, slunk away toward the rice section with him. Since that day, we've continued shopping there, but now my wife and I stick together to avoid any more unexpected Karen encounters. Story 3. Hey everyone, buckle up because I've got quite the wild story to share. It all began during what I thought would be a routine trip to Walmart. Little did I know, I was about to encounter a real-life Karen. You won't believe what happened. I was driving my old, slightly worn Honda around the Walmart parking lot, hunting for a good spot to park. As you probably know, Walmart parking lots are like the Wild West. You never know what might happen. By pure luck, I spotted a spot near the entrance and thought to myself, "Jackpot." Just as I was about to pull in, I noticed a woman, let's call her Karen, blocking the space with a shopping cart full of items. She was standing there as if she owned the entire lot, glaring at me with a look of pure entitlement. I politely waved and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I was about to park here." That simple statement set her off like a firework on the 4th of July. She turned to me with an expression of disgust, as if I were something unpleasant she'd stepped on. "Excuse me, I was here first. You can find another spot," she declared. I don't usually like confrontation, but this was ridiculous. "Ma'am," I replied calmly, "this is a parking lot. There are no dibs or reservations. I saw the spot first, and I'm parking here." Karen crossed her arms and let out an exasperated huff, looking like a child who didn't get their favorite toy. "I insist you find another spot. This one is mine," she demanded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's a parking space, not the last slice of pie on Thanksgiving. Still, I kept my cool. "I'm not going to argue with you. I'm parking here, end of story." As I started to pull into the space, Karen erupted. She screamed so loudly that other shoppers turned to look. "This is outrageous. Somebody get the manager. I demand justice." I shook my head, thinking this lady was overreacting, but this was just the beginning. As I got out of my car, Karen stormed over with her phone in hand, looking like she was about to call in reinforcements. "You can't just take someone's spot like that. I'll have you banned from Walmart." I chuckled, thinking she was bluffing. "All right, ma'am, you do what you need to do. I'll be inside getting my groceries." Thinking the drama was over, I headed into the store, but I was wrong, very wrong. While I was in the cereal aisle, debating between Fruit Loops and Cheerios, the store manager, Dave, tapped me on the shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Are you the person involved in an incident in the parking lot?" I scratched my head, completely baffled. "Yeah, that was me. What's going on?" Dave sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Karen says you stole her parking spot and is demanding that we ban you from the store." I was stunned. Banned from Walmart over a parking spot? "Dave, you've known me for years. I didn't steal anything. Can't we just move on from this?" Dave looked apologetic. "I'll try to talk to her and resolve this. Just stay polite, please." I nodded, thinking this was the most absurd situation I'd ever been in. I continued shopping, half expecting Karen to show up with a pitchfork-wielding mob. Instead, I found her waiting near the checkout lanes, grinning like she'd won the lottery. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You can't just steal my spot and get away with it." I laughed, trying to diffuse the tension. "Ma'am, I just want to buy my groceries and go home. Can we end this here?" Karen shook her head. "No, I've already called the police. They'll be here soon to arrest you." I nearly dropped my gallon of milk. Arrested for parking in an open space? Was this real life? Sure enough, the police arrived shortly after. Officer Daniels, a no-nonsense man with a big mustache, approached me. "Are you the one causing trouble over a parking spot?" he asked. I sighed, realizing how ridiculous this had become. "Officer, I parked in an open spot. I didn't take anything from anyone." Daniels raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I need both of you to step outside and explain what happened." Back in the parking lot, Karen and I stood before Officer Daniels like we were at high noon. As we both shared our sides of the story, he shook his head in disbelief. "This is absurd," he said. "It's not illegal to park in an open space. Ma'am, I suggest you let this go and allow people to park in peace." Karen wasn't having it. "But he stole my spot. You have to do something." Officer Daniels wasn't moved. "Ma'am, please move on with your day. We have real issues to address." Karen was fuming as the officer walked away. "You'll regret this," she yelled after him. I thought the madness was over, but it wasn't. A few days later, I received a letter informing me that Karen had filed a legal complaint against me, claiming emotional distress over the incident. I ended up in court, where Karen's exaggerated story quickly fell apart under questioning. My lawyer presented security footage and witness statements that proved I'd done nothing wrong. The judge saw through Karen's antics and dismissed her case, reprimanding her for wasting the court's time. As Karen left the courtroom in handcuffs for filing a false report, I couldn't help but feel relieved. Justice had finally prevailed, and I was free to return to my peaceful Walmart shopping trips, hopefully without any more Karens. Story 4. My mom has self-diagnosed me with developmental disorders and autism since I was 7 years old. Our house was always filled with books like Developmental Disorders, Kids Learning Games, and How to Take Care of Autistic Kids. I found it strange because I was doing well in school and managing my daily life just fine. I got good grades, made friends, and even had a wide vocabulary for a second grader. Fast forward to when I was 17, we finally went to a professional doctor who confirmed that her assumptions weren't true. Despite the doctor's diagnosis, my mom refused to let it go. She would frequently make comments like, "You shouldn't go to veterinary school because you're autistic. You should listen to modern music if you want to make friends. You and your brother are bad at video games because you have autism and developmental disorders." One day, after she brought up the "you're bad at video games because you have autism" comment again, I decided to turn the tables. I started Elden Ring, a challenging video game, handed her the controller, and said, "If you can't figure this game out, does that mean you have developmental disabilities?" She couldn't even figure out how to jump or attack, no matter how many times I explained it to her. Frustrated, she started yelling. That moment must have struck a nerve because she hasn't dared to bring up that nonsense since. A little about me. I'm 22, Asian, and about to graduate with a double major. While I didn't get into veterinary school, I'm still proud of how far I've come. Currently, I'm living with my mom, but I plan to move out as soon as I graduate. Despite my accomplishments, she still insists that I lack self-help skills. Here are a few examples of her more unusual behaviors. Laundry habits. She washes clothes at 80 degrees Celsius because she believes that's the only way to kill bacteria. Opinions on my brother. A few weeks ago, she said, "Your brother is 13 and still plays with Legos, while his classmates play video games." What she doesn't mention is that she heavily limits his screen time and hasn't allowed him to have a smartphone. Forcing water intake. My older sister, her daughter from a previous marriage, has kidney problems inherited from her father's side. Although my doctor says I'm fine, my mom used to force me to drink 3,000–4,000 ml of water daily. She would yell at me if she thought I wasn't drinking enough. Music preferences. I went to a Slash concert a while ago. My mom's spam called me because I got home at 11:30 p.m. She accused me of liking old music only to bond with my dad, who isn't a fan of the artist. Social skills books. From time to time, she asks me to read Peer's registered trademark for young adults, social skills training for adults with autism spectrum disorder and other social challenges. Despite all this, I've worked hard to stay focused on my goals. Once I graduate and move out, I'm hopeful that I can find more peace and independence. Story 5. I am by no means an expert or professional at revenge, but I am a patient person. I disclosed this situation to a friend, and they directed me here. I am using an alternate account for obvious reasons. It is a long story, but the setup and backstory are important. 7 years ago, I was fortunate enough to purchase my own place. I had saved for 10 years and worked diligently, and I was overjoyed to have a place to call my own. Being a single person on the mortgage meant I had to make compromises. One such compromise was buying a property on a shared block, which was considerably less expensive. Where I am from, this usually means the property is under a shared ownership title. For some, that is a bonus as it means there is a communal fund for repairs. Additionally, insurance is typically less expensive as it is collective, and other aspects like maintenance are taken care of. Shared ownership titles also come with numerous bylaws and restrictions on what residents can and cannot do. I am a rather private and introverted person, So having to deal with people and have limits on how I live was not acceptable. I took my time and found the perfect property, a shared block, but with individual ownership title. The only requirement was that I needed to pay public liability insurance for the shared walkway on the property split equally between owners. The real estate agent was local to my area, and there were about 3 degrees of separation between us. He had friends who were friends with my friends, that sort of connection. While I did not know him personally, I knew of him, which felt reassuring. Approximately 5 months after moving in, I received a knock on my door from the owner-landlord of the adjacent property to discuss insurance. I asked for a copy of the policy for my records. When it arrived, I discovered it was for shared ownership insurance. I was incredibly confused, and after much discussion, I learned the property was not an individual ownership title, but a shared ownership title. I contacted my lawyer who had handled the title transfer. He was dumbfounded, but ultimately did everything possible to rectify the situation. I arranged a meeting with a real estate agent. I brought emails and printouts of the advertisements, all stating it was individual ownership, plus emails between the real estate agent and my lawyer discussing its individual ownership status. Despite the evidence being absolutely clear, he refused to accept any fault or offer compensation. While I understand he was protecting himself, I would not forget this slight. I entered into mediation with the real estate agent. All I requested was that when the time came for me to sell, they would handle the sale or cover the costs. I thought this was reasonable, but they flatly refused and offered me $1,000 to drop the matter, which I declined. I had the option to pursue legal action and was advised by the mediator to do so, but ultimately decided against it for several reasons, primarily my health at the time. So I planned and plotted, contemplating how to get even with this dishonest individual. I settled on the following approach. I located his personal social media page, which was not set to private, and found photographs of a gentleman's vacation he had taken a few weeks prior, approximately 5 to 6 months after I purchased the property. I also found his address through a business registration search. On the anniversary of the sale, for 6 years straight, I sent him flowers with a note. Dear real estate agent, remembering you on this, our special day. She has your eyes. Love, L. The messages varied slightly over the years, but always included, on this, our special day, and some cryptic reference to a child and a desire to reconnect. Occasionally, I arranged for postcards and letters to be sent from another country, the one he had visited on his gentleman's vacation, always signed, Love, L. 3 weeks ago, I learned that this individual had recently divorced, lost his home, and is no longer working as a real estate agent. His wife had discovered his infidelity. The story I was told through mutual acquaintances went along these lines. He would receive mysterious gifts and flowers every year on the same date. His wife finally connected the dots and realized the significance of the date, leading him to admit his infidelity. I had not intended this outcome, but it emerged that a year before I purchased my house, he had gone on holiday and returned with an intimate health condition, which he transmitted to his wife, but somehow convinced her it was not his fault. As such, our special day coincided with the time he had been unfaithful without protection with someone who was not his wife, just 1 year earlier. He has reportedly lost his house, half of his retirement savings, and his business. I occasionally feel somewhat guilty about all of it, but then I remember that he is a deceitful person, and justice, like myself, is a patient and calculated force. Story 6. This beautiful country of ours has a relatively low population density, largely due to historical events like the infamous famine. For context, consider watching Black 47 *. However, it also has layer upon layer of civil servants and bureaucracy. Our system of government includes 2 houses and a legal requirement for 1 representative for every 30,000 people. Beneath that, we have a local government structure with authorities in each county and city, each with their own elected councilors and administrative staff. These local councils handle responsibilities like planning, fire safety, roads, refuse collection, and other services. As a result, the public service sector is the largest employer in the country. This system exists on an island with a southern republic covering approximately 26,000 square miles. At the time of this story, there were around 31 or 32 local authorities serving a population of about 5.5 million people. It's a bit excessive, but that's a discussion for another day. While working for one of these local authorities as a senior executive engineer, my friend, a brilliant civil engineer and fire officer, had the misfortune of getting a new boss. This new county engineer was fresh in the role, eager to prove himself, and, as the saying goes, full of boundless energy and determination to set things right. This particular county had a unique geography. It was landlocked by neighboring counties, and its odd shape was further complicated by a new motorway that ran through it. In many areas, the only way to access certain parts of the county by road was by passing through another county. This detail is important to the story. Most staff used their own cars for work and submitted mileage sheets monthly. These were approved by their direct manager and then sent up the chain for reimbursement. The mileage rate not only covered the cost of running the vehicle, but often provided a small financial boost. Crossing the local authorities' boundaries required an additional sheet explaining the reason for the trip, which also needed managerial approval. Under their previous boss, a system had been devised to make this process simpler. Employees didn't need to submit their mileage sheets every month. Instead, they could let them accumulate for a few months, submitting them all at once to receive a lump sum payment, a convenient option for planning holidays or special occasions. The extra sheets for boundary crossings were generally ignored because crossing into other counties was such a frequent occurrence. Enter the new boss. Determined to enforce the rules strictly, he announced that all expenses and mileage sheets must be submitted monthly, detailing every trip and its purpose. Any sheets lacking thorough explanations would be returned unsigned. He called a meeting to deliver this message in his most authoritative tone, declaring his intention to straighten everything out and get everyone in line. Naturally, this new directive didn't sit well with the staff. After the meeting, my friend and his colleagues spent a few days mulling over how to adapt to this micromanaged system. Finally, my friend came up with a clever solution and shared it with his coworkers. Together, they devised a plan for a bit of petty revenge. For the next month, everyone's work seemed to require frequent travel to the farthest corners of the county. They carefully adjusted their routes to ensure they crossed county boundaries multiple times a day, 6 days a week. This meant filling out thousands of additional permission forms to account for boundary crossings. At the end of the first month, the new boss was faced with an overwhelming pile of forms. It took him over 4 weeks to process them all. By the time the second month's batch of forms arrived, he was completely swamped. The senior staff were called into a discreet meeting, the details of which were kept very quiet. The only outcome from that meeting was a quiet word from the senior staff. Everything was to revert to the old system. It was a perfect teaching moment, a case of petty revenge combined with an important lesson in practicality. Story 7. I grew up in a cramped 2-story house, sharing the downstairs with my mom, stepdad, and 3 older brothers. Upstairs lived another family with 4 boys. It was a testosterone-filled environment, to say the least. Living space was tight. My brothers shared 2 rooms, while I was stuck in the middle with a tiny space barely bigger than a closet. But you know what? I made the best of it. While my brothers' rooms looked and smelled like garbage dumps, I kept my little sanctuary neat and tidy. I even saved up and got myself a sweet TV setup, pretty impressive for the mid-90s, if I do say so myself. Life wasn't easy, being the only girl in a house full of rowdy boys. My brothers were always roughhousing, leaving messes everywhere, and generally being inconsiderate jerks. But I dealt with it. I had my own space, my own rules. Or so I thought. One day, I came home early from school and found something that made my blood boil. My oldest brother was sprawled on my bed, watching my TV, with cigarette butts and snack wrappers scattered around. The room reeked of sweat and Other things I'd rather not think about. Me, what the hell are you doing in my room? Brother, chill out, sis. I'm just watching some TV. Me, get out, now. He just laughed and took his sweet time leaving. After he was gone, I scrubbed every surface I could reach, but the violation of my privacy stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more and more signs that my brothers were using my room when I wasn't around. Rumpled bedsheets, moved furniture, mysterious stains. It was disgusting. The final straw came when I overheard my brothers talking about bringing girls to their secret hideout. I knew exactly what they meant, and I was furious. My tiny room, my one safe space in this chaotic house, was being used as some kind of love nest for my gross brothers. That's when I hatched my plan. I went to the hardware store and bought a bunch of flat-headed push pins, about 250 of them. Then I waited for a day when I knew I'd be out of the house for a while. That morning, I carefully placed the push pins under my bedsheet, covering the entire mattress. It took forever, but I made sure they were evenly spaced and well hidden. Then I went to school, my heart pounding with anticipation. The next day, my phone rang. It was my mom, and she was trying hard not to laugh. Mom, sweetie, you're not going to believe what happened. Me, what's up, Mom? Mom, your brother finally got that girl from school to go out with him. You know, the one he's been chasing for weeks? Me, aha. Mom, well, apparently they came back here, and let's just say things didn't go as planned. I could hear the laughter in her voice as she explained how my brother and his date had rushed out of the house, both yelping in pain and covered in tiny puncture marks. My plan had worked perfectly. No one was seriously hurt, but my message was crystal clear: stay out of my room. Mom, I don't know what possessed you to do that, but I have to say, it was pretty clever. Me, thanks, Mom. I'm just glad no one got hurt. After that day, my room became off limits. My brothers never dared to enter without permission again. Even years later, my oldest brother admitted that he still checks chairs before sitting down, just in case. Looking back, I know it was a petty move. But when you're a teenage girl living in a house full of inconsiderate boys, sometimes you have to take drastic measures to protect your space. And let me tell you, the peace and quiet I enjoyed after that day made it all worth it. Sure, we had our issues growing up, but time heals most wounds. These days, my brothers and I get along great. We can even laugh about the pin incident now, but I bet they still think twice before invading someone else's personal space. Story 8. I'm not a malicious person, though I do feel some joy reading this sub. First off, my dad was a great man, he was just dumb sometimes. Some background: I am one of the youngest from a very large family. My mom passed away when I was 10. My dad, bless his heart, was from the generation where the man worked and the woman took care of everything at home. When my mom passed away, the responsibility of everything at home fell to the kids. By the time I was 11, I was regularly cooking dinner for 8-10 people. I had a long list of chores. Truly, it was fine. I'm sure I pitied myself some because my friends didn't have these responsibilities, but I really had a great childhood, minus the dead mom thing. When I was 16, my dad got me a car. I paid for gas with babysitting money. My dad paid for insurance and maintenance. I had to get my little sister and myself to and from school. I had to do the grocery shopping. I had to get the two of us to practices and meets. I had to run chores. I was responsible for driving her wherever she needed to go. My day consisted of getting to school, getting home, grocery store, making dinner if it was my turn, homework, practice, bed. Meets were on weekends. I never went out. I was never in trouble. I was an honor student. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was a good kid. All was well, relatively. And then, my dad got a new girlfriend. Her kids were in high school with me. She told him that if I got to have a car, I should be fully responsible for it. After all, her kids were. So my dad sat me down and said, "I've decided that if you want a car, you have to pay for it." I expect you to take over payments, maintenance, and insurance. I told him I couldn't afford that. He told me I'd have to get a job. I said I had no time for a job. He told me I'd have to figure it out. So, cue malicious compliance, I guess. I went and got my keys and handed them to him. I told him I didn't want the car anymore. He was a little shocked, but I guess he thought I'd come crawling back for it soon. Lol. The next morning, my sister and I missed the bus. I had to wake him up so he could drive us to school. He was pissed. We got a ride home from school. At 5:30, when dinner was supposed to be on the table, I was reading on the couch. He came home. "Where is dinner?" I said, "Oh, I didn't have a car to get to the store. I'm sure there are some leftovers you can heat up." He told me I'd have to start walking to the store. I told him I didn't have time. Finals were coming up. Didn't he care about my grades? An hour later, I told him it was time for practice. My sister and I needed a ride to and from practice. He told me to call a friend. Sorry, I can't. No one on the team lives in this town. It would be really out of the way for anyone else. He drove us. Then he picked us up, silently fuming the whole way. The next morning, oops, we missed the bus again. I had to wake him up again. Plus, he had no orange juice in the morning, on account of no one going to the store. Once again, no dinner on the table. He had to drive me to the store when he got home. Once again, we needed a ride to practice. I informed him that the meet that weekend was an hour away and we had to be there at 9. That was enough for him. It was probably the most parenting he'd done in 30 years of being a father. He called me to the top of the stairs. He tossed my car keys up to me. "I've decided you can have your car back. I'll pay for half of the payment and half of the insurance. You can only use it for school, practice, meets, chores, and driving your sister." I laughed, tossed the keys back and said, "That's all I use it for. Anyway, I don't want the car. Sell it." 5 minutes later, he's screaming my name from the bottom of the stairs. He overhand whips the keys up the stairs. Y'all, my dad never got mad. His new deal was he'd pay for everything but gas, but I wasn't allowed any personal use of the car. I said, "So, I have to pay to do chores and I get no benefit from it." "No, thank you." And I tossed the keys back down the stairs. Half an hour later, he demands my presence in the living room. He calmly said he would pay for everything but gas. I'd have the use of the car when I wanted, but I had to do all the stuff I'd previously been doing without complaint until his girlfriend got into his head. He didn't phrase it like that, of course. Then he said, "I hope you learned a lesson here." I did. Lol, I certainly did.